Did you know that Rust Movie Productions has contested the New Mexico OSHA's citations and penalty resulting from the deadly shooting in October 2021 on the Rust movie set? So this is separate from the involuntary manslaughter charges that were brought this week against Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the movie's armor. So today we're going to go over what that means and what the New Mexico complaint tells us. So if you're new here, welcome. And if you're returning, thank you so much for coming back. So I appreciate you so much. So let's get to it. Okay, so taking a step back just to give you a sense of where we are, here is the New Mexico Department. This is their OSHA, which basically, if you don't know, there's federal OSHA and some states have OSHA, and usually they have their own laws on occupational health and safety. So this deals with things like if there's an accident on a workplace. You will definitely remember all of the OSHA guidance and CDC guidance we got during the COVID pandemic. So that's basically what we're talking about here. So they conducted an investigation, and as a result of that investigation, in April of 2022, they had a citation and penalties. And here, if you look at it, here's the press release. If you wanted to look at the summary of the investigation, you can find it here. I'm not going to go over that because we're going to go over the complaint, and the complaint has even more in it. But if you wanted to look at it, there it is. Here's the actual citation. Here's the press release, which really tells us everything we need to know. So if you see here, what was interesting, it was a willful serious violation. That's the most serious violation you can get. So they went to the full extent they could, and they also issued the highest penalty that they could under New Mexico law. So clearly this was very unsafe. Here you've got, Rust Movie Productions was cited for the plain indifference to recognize hazards associated with the use of firearms on set. So very serious. So in any event, what wound up happening is after that, we'll go to the docket. The company, as I mentioned, they contested the findings. So that's here, the notice of contention. Contest, which is on 5/10. So then what happens is it goes into the administrative process. And what happened then in August of 2022, the agency filed their complaint. And so what we're going to go over today is the complaint. Let me find it here. That was in August. Where is it? Okay, here it is. Sorry. There is the complaint, which we will go over. And then you will see here, there's a lot been going on, and this is their docket, when we've got their answer. And then what's interesting, and so then a lot of discovery has been going on, as you can see here. But what's interesting, I think, was look what was filed on the 19th. They filed an order basically continuing the matter and halting the exchanging of expert witnesses and discovery on that matter because what has been found, it was probably on the other document. What was found was that, get to the document, the docket. What was found was that this is so interesting. Okay, so if you call, on January 19th was when the prosecutor made publicly announced that they would be filing charges against involuntary manslaughter charges against Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, and they also mentioned that the other gentleman had filed a plea agreement, had agreed to plea out. So what I thought was interesting is on the same date, on the 19th, we've got this motion that the parties are wishing to re-engage in settlement discussions, which they believe will be fruitful, and so therefore they've agreed to basically halt the process for a bit until they figure out, kind of what's going on. So what I think that's interesting. I don't know if they will settle. I think that they probably will seriously consider settling. But in any event, until they do, what we get to find out is in the complaint, we find out a lot more information, I think, than what we've seen so far on kind of what's happened. So here's the complaint. And so we'll go through this. The first part of it is real basic. This is pretty much jurisdictional. It's telling us, this is the agency. Here's how we have jurisdiction. Here's all the laws. You really don't get to anything interesting until paragraph 10. So here it says that employer is a production company formed for the purpose of filming a movie. Now, what's interesting about this, and we'll talk about this when I go over part 2, which is the defendant's answer to this complaint. There's a lot of discussion about who is the employer. And so this here is going to be an issue. So in any event, we'll look forward to that. So this is kind of where it gets interesting. And here, the first part of it just talks about when they found out. They found out via a news release from the sheriff that the injury occurred. And then, of course, they got assigned. And so then they first said that they tried to go on the 22nd to the site, but they were turned away because the sheriffs were still investigating. And so then they came back when the sheriffs were done. And then they talk about, kind of what they did and how many people they interviewed, just showing what the scope of the investigation was. And then they talk about they had their second meeting with the company and then, or the employer, and then they informed them that they would be, probably filing charges. So what I thought the next part that's interesting, this is all pretty basic procedural stuff, but what I thought was interesting. So the first thing here I think that's interesting is who are the players? Because this is going to be really important to know generally, but also to understand how does this movie set work? Who did what? Who is responsible for who, right? Because that's a lot of what's going on here is who's responsible and what are the different roles that the different people had. So this really kind of tells us a lot more detail of who's involved. So we've got the line producer, whose name is Ms. Pickle, and then we've got her person that's right under her is Catherine Rowe Walters. They also, now specifically, Ms. Pickle had directly hired individuals and crews, proved hours, and was basically involved with had the authority to discipline employees. So to me, this would be in regular employment law terms, they were a supervisor, right? A manager. And so this is establishing here that she also had supervisory authority. And that's important for how the law works and who would be responsible for what goes on. And then a third person they mentioned is, of course, Dave Halls. This is the individual that in the criminal matter pled out. So he was a first assistant director, but he was also a safety coordinator for Rust. They talk about here where they got their ammunition, that they were only supposed to have dummies and blanks, and they talk about a little bit of that. Here's the next part. So then they talk about what did the production do to advise the crew and talent about safety. So they said that what the employer, when they asked that question, the employer said that they used safety procedures taken from film industry safety bulletins, and they give examples of these various safety bulletins that they contend that they had on site. And I thought this was interesting. This one, right here, blanks can kill, treat all firearms as though they are loaded. So that's showing what were they on notice of what their obligations were to inform people of safety dangers, and what did they actually do. So here, this is talking more about procedures. Again, not anything, it's important, but it's not definitely something interesting, but it's basically saying that the way it's supposed to work is that the armor is the one that's in charge of training individuals on the storage maintenance and handling of firearms. The person's supposed to be the one that gives the gun to the individuals, and so that's kind of their responsibility. But then, and also in addition to these duties, the employer also required the armorer to take on the role of props assistant to Ms. Zachary when firearms were not in active use. Okay. Question yourself whether that's very, in hindsight, a smart thing to do, to just have on a Western movie to have a cowboy. I mean, I don't know if it's an old Western movie with wardens, and I don't know. In any event, okay. So here we get here. This is where this detail in this administrative complaint is much more than what we had in the investigation summary from the department, which is fine. That's normal. Now we're going to an actual litigation, so of course you expect to see more information. So here we find out. So this kind of starts the process of what was going on and what was the situation with the safety of guns on this set. So here we see that on October 9, the armorer texted Ms. Pickle, and again, remember, she's the headline producer, about the amount of armor days the employer, Rust Productions, was willing to pay her since she had already completed 3 armor days at the armor rate. So what we see from here is that the armor rate, there's an armor rate for when she's doing armor duties, and then there's presumably a much lower rate for when she's being like an assistant to the prop manager. So, Ms. Gutierrez-reed, she informed Ms. Pickle that she had to train some actors, including actor-producer Alec Baldwin, and she still had to do this, so she hadn't done this yet. And she had to spend time maintaining the guns to ensure they work for future scenes. Seems reasonable. She also told Ms. Pickle, it's just a very gun-heavy script, and we have to make sure people are trained and guns are ready. Ms. Pickle responded the same day and said, let me talk to Ro. And Ro, by the way, is the nickname for Ms. Pickle's second in command, I guess you would say. Later that day, on October 9, the armorer follows back with Ms. Pickle, and she says, any news? I at least have to clean them. And remember, she's reaching out because she's been told she only has 8 days for armor rate work. And so she's trying to figure out, like, hey, I'm gonna come close to that. She's trying to be mindful of, I think, what she's doing and letting them know, look, this is what I'm doing, and this may take more time than 8 days. So she says that any news, I at least have to clean them and train the kid tomorrow because it's our last day and we have a big fight scene Wednesday night. Ms. Pickle responded on the same day and asked, how many armor days are you requesting? The armorer responded with at least a cleaning day after the big battles. We already had guns jamming yesterday. I just feel like it ends up being 10 armor days by the end of it. Any day I'm shooting, training, or having to clean for the next battle should be an armor day. So she's basically telling, like, look, based on my experience, I'm the armorer. This is the script. This is what I see coming. We've already had guns jamming. This is what I think we're going to need. We're going to need 10 armor days. So then we've got the next day, Ms. Pickle informed her that she was allowed 8 days. So they didn't change it. They just said 8 days. As per her contract, and the rest of her time, she's to spend it as a props assistant. And this was despite, I guess my point I just made, despite the armorer saying, I'm going to probably need 10 to ensure safety, and that I need the actors to have completed all firearm trainings. So then we've got October 14th. Ms. Pickle emailed the armorer and informed her that she was focusing far more on her armor duties and not enough on her duties as props assistant. I'd love to know what was going on with that. In the same email, but then in the same email, she says, you're spending too much time on the props. But then she also says, oh, and by the way, you left firearms unattended and you need to implement a check in and out system immediately. Fair. And so Ms. Reed responded by informing Ms. Pickle that since firearms are used on set every day, those have to be her priority because when they're not, dangerous mistakes can happen. Oh my gosh. Okay. So then on the next day, on October 15, Ms. Gutierrez-Reed texted Ms. Pickle to express her concern that Mr. Baldwin never tried shooting with the holster and wanted to ensure Mr. Baldwin was ready for a scene the following day. Ms. Pickle informed her that if there was more to be done, he'd let you know. And remember, the fatal scene was involving pulling the gun out of the holster. Okay. So then, on October 16, 2 days after the October 14 email exchange between Ms. Pickle and Ms. Gutierrez-Reed, this is when 2 misfires happened. So this is on the Saturday before the fatal shooting. And in the first instance, they had the props master inadvertently fired a blank when she was loading a gun. And then the second misfire involved a stunt double for Mr. Baldwin. And basically something went off. And during the agency's interview with Ms. Gutierrez-Reed, she said she was not able to train the stuntman because he was trained by the stunt coordinator, since stuntmen technically fall under the authority of stunt coordinator. That's really confusing to me, concerning too, because I think the armor is supposed to be paid and there for the benefit of the entire set. Okay. And we don't know if this is true, but in any event, that's concerning. So then after, and again, this is all alleged and we don't know, that's what she said. So after the misfires occurred on October 16, Lane Looper, first assistant camera operator, texted Ms. Walters, so Roe, the second person in line, and said that we've now had 3 accidental discharges. This is super unsafe. The third accidental discharge involved a special effects popper, which is a small explosive that stimulates a bullet impact on a surface, kind of like those. I'm imagining those poppers you use at the kids use at 4th of July. Lane Looper, okay, so then Ms. Walters responded, accidental discharge on the firearms? Lane Looper responded, yeah, 2 discharges today and 1 on week 1. Ms. Walters did not ask any additional questions. So then, according to employee interviews, this is important, Ms. Pickle, Ms. Walters, and Mr. Halls, that's the safety coordinator, did not investigate these incidents, even though these were being brought to their attention, or tried to understand how misfires occurred despite being aware. And again, these are all allegations, but that's what they're alleging. Next day, on Sunday, Ms. Reed informed Ms. Pickle that she was running out of those paid armor days, and if gunfire will continue on set, she's going to need Ms. Pickle to speak to the producers, presumably to approve additional armor days. And Ms. Pickle replied to Ms. Reed by informing her that there would be no more trading, that means just misspelling, days for the actors on set. Ms. Gutierrez then asked to clarify, training days? So in other words, there's no more training days. And Ms. Pickle said, like training Alec and such. And apparently these emails exist. So basically, okay. On 3 days later, on October 20th, which is 1 day before the fatal shooting, Mr. Looper, the cameraman, resigned, due in part to safety concerns stemming from the accidental misfires. And in his resignation, he stated that the safety meetings were not held the day that the misfires happened. So then, of course, here's where we get to actually what happened, which this is more detail than we have in the investigation report. So this was really interesting for me to see. So basically what it says is on October 21st, Ms. Gutierrez-Reed loaded a .45 caliber Colt revolver for Mr. Baldwin with what she believed were dummy rounds, walked into the church and handed the revolver to Mr. Halls. So she didn't hand it to Alec, she handed it to Mr. Halls. Ms. Gutierrez-Reed was under the impression that Halls would only be sitting in with the gun until Mr. Baldwin arrived inside the church. So I don't know what was said between those two, but that was what allegedly her impression was, that he was just going to hold it. According to Ms. Gutierrez-Reed's interview, she told Mr. Halls, "Just let me know when Alec gets here, and then that way I'll go ahead and check it in for him, and we can start the scene and everything." She left the church expecting Mr. Halls to notify her when Mr. Baldwin arrived so she could conduct the firearm safety check for his gun. And then shortly after she left the church, she proceeded to shortly after she left the church, unfortunately, Mr. Halls proceeded to hand the revolver to Mr. Baldwin, and of course, he aimed the revolver in Halyna Hutchins and Mr. Souza's direction, the director, and it fired, and the director was hurt, and of course, sadly, Ms. Hutchins was killed. So, as a result of that, it says here he documented 2 violations, and the first was failure to ensure that the workplace is free from recognized hazards. So under the OSHA, the federal OSHA, and pretty much most state OSHA's laws, an employer has a general duty of care to protect its employees from unsafe hazards in the workplace. I mean, this can't be any more clear, guns, this part. So this is where they're laying the groundwork for their for the justification for the citations that they gave. So basically, the first one was the general failure to provide a safe workplace, and they violated that because they basically failed to stop from having a gunfire on set. They didn't also provide staff responsible for ensuring firearm safety with sufficient time to inspect ammunition. They talk about all the different hazards that already happened. So they say, look, this first misfire, that was a danger to Sarah and any employees nearby. The same thing with the other misfiring. They note the fact that Mr. Halls was present on set when these happened. I think he's the safety coordinator. Sarah was in a supervisor. She was a prop master. So there's all these people that knew what was going on, and what at least according to the New Mexico complaint is that nothing was done. And in fact, according to employees interviewed, crew members verbally expressed their surprise and discomfort with the employer's lack of action regarding the worksite safety issues. Another problem is that the New Mexico OSHA found that the employer had conducted no investigation of those 2 incidents that did occur. So we've got the one with Sarah, and then we've got the one with the stuntman. They've also got the notice, again, showing that the employer was on notice. We've got the complaint from the first assistant camera operator, and then his ultimate resignation. But then also the fact that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed expressed her emails expressing the need that I need more time to be able to train. And then she's told, well, you'll be told if that's necessary. And she said, I want to, I train the stuntman. And she's like, no, the stunt coordinator will handle that. And then of course, she said, well, and then on the incident itself, she said that she was never informed when Mr. Baldwin arrived to the church, so she could conduct her safety check. So she couldn't have done it. She had no idea. They also here then go into this paragraph here is talking about the employer's notice. Their employer, they should know this, but they're showing, and they did, because they had safety protocols, because they had safety coordinators, because here they're saying that all cast and crew had stop work authority. But despite all this and all this knowledge with, emails to supervisors, nothing was done. So basically it's just all laying all the groundwork for the full cause of action here. And then, but this is where this is bad. I mean, if you are an employer, this is not what you want to receive. Employer demonstrated plain indifference to the hazards associated with firearms by routinely failing to practice their own safety protocols, failure to enforce adherence to safety protocols, and failure to ensure that the handling of deadly weapons was afforded the time and effort needed to keep the cast and crew safe. I think that's what is really the kicker here. The fact that it seemed like this was fast and furious, everything was done kind of on the cheap, and this idea, well, you just get those 8 days, and even if it's like, well, what if they needed more? And it's like, well, just 8. And so, that doesn't look good. Again, the employer will make their defenses. This is just allegations, but still, it doesn't look good. And it certainly, there's emails, and so certainly this is not good. I don't think anyone's surprised based on what we've learned, but this is not good. But this plain indifference, it's almost like a reckless disregard standard. It is the highest standard. It's a willful violation. That's the highest standard you can get. This is not a negligence violation. This is a willful violation, is basically what they're calling it. So, then there was this other citation they gave about a fire extinguisher, and they were saying, basically it didn't, which we'll go through down here, but basically saying that they also, in addition to the more serious stuff, they had this a fire extinguisher on set that didn't have proper, certificates or whatever. And the response to that was, well, we don't use that. That's not our fire extinguisher. We use that for like smoke, and which I think probably is a reasonable. So, and we'll see in the defense response that they kind of go after that, which is a tactic to say, look, you're going off on this fire extinguisher. Why would any of this other stuff be true? So it's a tactic, but I don't know. It just seemed a little ticky-tacky to me. But in any event, the more serious stuff obviously is the main things that led to the willful serious violation and the $136,000 citation. And then the rest of this really just goes over the citations, which, defines the legal background for the 3 citations, and then the penalties. And that's it. So there you go. So what do I think? I think this is probably going to settle. I think the fact that on the same day that the prosecutor said they were going to bring charges, I don't know that it's a coincidence that was also the same day that they filed the notice that they're going to revisit settlement negotiations. But in any event, that's against Russ Movie Productions. Again, this has nothing to do with those individual criminal cases that we don't know if they'll go forward. But in any event, I thought it was really super interesting. Let me know in your thoughts below. What was surprising to you? And also stay tuned, because my next video is going to go through the defendant's answer to this complaint. And it's very interesting. And particularly on things like, what is an employer? What is an independent contractor? Who has the authority to do what? So very interesting. So we'll see. But in any event, thank you so much for joining. I'll link my playlist here, and you can check out some more videos that I have on this case. If it goes forward on the involuntary manslaughter charges, I will be covering it. I also will keep track of what's going on here with this work, this OSHA matter. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you in my next one. Bye.